All right, let's dive in. We're looking at biometrics in Guyana's upcoming elections today.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, it is, actually. We've got this article from News Source Guyana, and it's about how the opposition leader, Aubrey Norton, is really pushing back on the Guyana Elections Commission on their decision to not use biometrics in the 2025 election. He even uses some strong words to describe this decision, you know?
Oh, really? Like what?
He calls it uninformed, irresponsible, even conniving.
Wow. Okay, so I'm guessing this is more than just like a disagreement about technology.
Right. There's definitely something deeper going on here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to really grasp why this is such a hot button issue, you really need to consider Guyana's political history.
I see.
They've had a lot of very close and often, disputed elections in the past, so election integrity is a super sensitive topic.
So Norton's reaction, it's not just about the tech itself, it's about these concerns about fairness and making sure the election is legitimate.
Exactly. And that's where biometrics come into play. For Norton, using things like fingerprint scanning is all about adding that extra layer of security, right? Making sure every vote is legitimate and getting rid of any chance of fraud.
It sounds like he's really making election integrity a priority.
Yeah. It's a big deal for him, for sure.
The article mentions that the GECOM chair, she cited lack of time as a big reason for not implementing the biometrics. So I'm curious, what would it actually take to get a system like that up and running in time?
It's definitely not a simple process. It's not just about buying a bunch of scanners and calling it a day.
Okay.
It involves a whole system overhaul. You got to start by procuring all the equipment, which, depending on the kind of system they go with, could be a huge investment.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then there's the training aspect. You need people who know how to operate the technology, troubleshoot any problems that might pop up, especially on election day when things can get a little chaotic.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Especially under pressure. You want everything to go smoothly.
Exactly. And then don't forget the whole public awareness piece.
Right.
You have to explain to voters why this new system is there, how it actually works, and what they need to do.
Right.
If people don't get it, they might be suspicious or distrustful, and that could lead to even more issues.
Oh, I can see that being a big problem.
Absolutely.
You've got the equipment, you've got the training, public education, all of that. It does seem like a big task to take on with an election just around the corner.
Oh, for sure.
But something in the article kind of stood out to me.
Okay, what's that?
The GECOM chair mentions that they already have laws in place for fingerprint comparison for voters who can't sign.
Right.
So wouldn't that mean there's already a system for fingerprint verification?
Well, that's a good point, and it highlights the difference between manual and digital biometric systems.
Okay.
What they currently have is a limited manual system for specific cases. But what's being debated now is a full-blown digital system.
So it would electronically record and verify every single voter's fingerprint.
Exactly. A much bigger undertaking.
Well, yeah, I can see how that would be even more complicated to set up, especially on such a tight timeline.
Definitely. Digital systems are way more complex and expensive. You need specialized software, secure databases to store all that fingerprint data, and a whole infrastructure to support it.
That makes sense.
It also brings up those big questions about data security and privacy, which
are super important.
Right. So the GECOM chair's concerns about not having enough legislation in place, those are definitely valid, especially when it comes to something as sensitive as fingerprint data.
It does sound like even the idea of using biometrics opens a whole can of worms.
Yeah, for sure.
But it seems like the GECOM chair hasn't completely dismissed the idea. Norton's urging her to get proposals from some expert firms to see if it's even possible to do this within the remaining time.
Okay.
What do you think about that? Would bringing in outside experts even be helpful at this point?
Well, it could be a smart move, but it's not a guaranteed solution. These firms, they could provide a more in-depth analysis of what's needed to implement this kind of system, and they could determine whether it's actually feasible in the time frame.
Okay.
But even the best consultants in the world, they can't work miracles. They need GECOM to give them clear guidance on their objectives and a realistic timeline.
Right, and they need everyone on board.
Exactly. The government and the opposition parties need to be on the same page about the goals and the process. If there's no agreement, even the best laid plan won't work.
So it's not just about the technical side of things, it's about making sure everyone's working together and that there's trust in the process.
Absolutely. In the end, you could have the most amazing biometric system in the world.
But if nobody trusts it, what's the point?
Exactly. It's about building a system that everyone has faith in, one that they believe will deliver accurate and fair election results.
This is already shaping up to be a super interesting deep dive.
Yeah, definitely.
We've got a lot more to unpack here, so let's continue this conversation and explore the wider implications of this biometric debate after a quick word from our sponsors.
Sounds good.
Just kidding. We'll be right back.
All right.
So we've talked about how implementing biometrics for Guyana's elections is pretty complicated with all these technical and legal and even political challenges.
Definitely.
It makes me wonder, are other countries having these same kinds of discussions about using biometrics in their elections?
Oh, absolutely. This is happening all over the world, not just Guyana.
Really?
Yeah, as technology gets more advanced and concerns about election security grow, these conversations are popping up everywhere.
I can see that. I mean, the idea of using fingerprints or even iris scans to verify voters seems like it would really increase people's confidence in the election results.
Yeah, that's a big reason why a lot of people like the idea. It's seen as more secure.
It definitely seems a lot harder to fake than just signing your name.
Right, but it's not a perfect solution.
Oh, I bet.
It's important to remember, any technology can be exploited, and that includes biometrics. There are still worries about data breaches, errors in the system, and even the potential for discrimination if the technology isn't designed and implemented very carefully.
So it's not as easy as just buying some new machines and everything's fixed.
Not at all. There are definitely trade-offs to consider.
Yeah.
That's where the heart of the debate lies. How do you balance the benefits like increased security and accuracy with the potential risks to privacy and fairness?
I guess that's where public trust comes in. If people don't get how the system works or they have concerns about their data, it could backfire.
Right. You could end up undermining confidence in the election even if the technology itself is sound.
Exactly. That ties back to what Norton was saying about the GECOM chair's lack of technical expertise. He was saying she's not qualified to make this decision.
Right. But like we talked about earlier, this goes beyond just the tech side of things, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So it's not just about knowing how the technology works.
No. You need to get the legal framework around elections, the logistics of implementing a nationwide system, the costs, and probably most importantly, the potential impact on voters.
It sounds like a really big responsibility then.
It is. It affects the foundation of a country's democracy. It's not just an IT project.
It seems like this whole debate in Guyana is kind of a small-scale version of a much bigger global conversation about the future of democracy in a tech-driven world.
That's a good way to put it. I think what's happening in Guyana gives us a lot of insight into the challenges and opportunities that we'll see as more and more countries think about integrating technology into their elections.
It's not just about biometrics themselves, it's about how to ensure that technology makes our democratic systems stronger, not weaker.
That's exactly right.
Okay, before we move on, I want to touch on one last thing from the article.
Okay.
Norton's calling for GECOM to get proposals from these expert firms to see if implementing biometrics is even doable.
Right.
What kinds of things would those firms have to look at?
Well, first off, they'd need to assess Guyana's current election infrastructure.
What do they already have?
Exactly. What systems are in place and what are their strengths and weaknesses? Then they can start figuring out different scenarios for integrating biometrics.
They would need to keep in mind Guyana's unique political and social landscape as well.
Absolutely. Context is everything. A system that works perfectly in one country might be a total disaster in another.
I see what you mean.
They'd also have to really examine the legal framework surrounding elections in Guyana. Are there any existing laws that need to be updated or amended to allow for biometrics?
That makes sense.
And of course, there's the issue of cost. Can Guyana afford to implement a solid biometric system? And if they can, what are the trade-offs?
And the cost goes beyond just the technology itself, right? You have to factor in all the training, maintenance, public education.
Exactly. It all adds up. A good feasibility study would have to analyze all those things.
To see the long-term financial impact?
Yeah, they'd have to compare those costs with the potential benefits, see if it's actually a smart investment for Guyana.
It sounds like quite a process.
It's definitely a major decision.
But necessary if Guyana is serious about exploring biometrics.
Yeah, I agree.
This deep dive has given me a lot to think about, that's for sure.
Me too.
It's incredible how a topic like biometrics in Guyana's elections can spark such a big conversation about technology and democracy.
It just goes to show that technology is never neutral. It's a tool. The choices we make about technology today will really shape the world of tomorrow.
Well said. We've definitely covered a lot today.
From the technical aspects to the bigger implications for democracy and governance.
It's been a great discussion.
It has. And I hope our listeners have a much better understanding of this issue now.
I think they do. Now, before we wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. This whole thing in Guyana has got me thinking, is this just the beginning? Are we going to see more and more of these debates about biometrics as technology keeps developing?
It's definitely a trend to watch. We're already seeing it play out in different countries.
Yeah.
Yeah. Governments are always looking for ways to, improve election security and make things run more efficiently.
Right.
And biometrics are often seen as the answer to those problems. But like we've been talking about, it's not a simple fix.
So for our listeners who are interested in this topic, what are some things they should keep in mind as they learn more about it?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that technology is just a tool. It's not some kind of magic solution that'll solve everything.
Right.
You still need solid institutions, transparent processes, and informed citizens. Those are all crucial for fair and democratic elections.
Like you said earlier, people, processes, and building a system that everyone trusts.
Exactly. Another thing to keep in mind is that there's no one right answer. What works in one country might be a total flop in another. Context matters a lot, so you really have to look at the specific challenges and opportunities in each situation.
No easy answers then.
Nope. Just careful consideration and thoughtful analysis.
Okay, so what else should people be on the lookout for?
I think it's really important to pay attention to how these systems are implemented. Who's making the decisions about what technology to use and how it'll be rolled out, what safeguards are in place, things like protecting people's privacy and preventing discrimination.
That's important.
Yeah. It's about holding those in power accountable and making sure the technology is being used to empower voters, not to control them.
Makes sense.
And last but not least, don't forget the power of your own voice. Get involved, ask questions, and demand transparency from your leaders. Engaged and informed citizens are the foundation of a healthy democracy.
That's a great point to end on. This whole discussion about biometrics in Guyana has really highlighted how technology and democracy are intertwined.
It's not just a technical issue.
It's about our values as a society and what kind of future we want.
Absolutely. And I hope our listeners have learned something new today.
Me too. Big thanks to you for joining us, and thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. As always, keep digging deeper, keep asking those questions, and keep those critical thinking skills sharp.
Couldn't have said it better myself.